Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here at Sanctuary Hills, which is kind of full of people. We've got quite a lot. I think how many is there here? 18? Yeah, 18 people. So we are moving up a level in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we talked about throughout this series, where we've met our basic physiological needs, we've met our needs for security and safety, protection, we've got armour, we've armed ourselves with weapons to protect ourselves, all that kind of stuff. So the next part is psychological needs. So we do need to look at social needs. So a part of psychological needs is the need for sort of social interactions and companionship, and just being not on your own. So it's something that humans are a social species, like many other primates, many other animals. We are social. We tend to want to live in groups and interact with other to the scientific term is conspecifics, but other people, other humans. We want to interact with other humans. That's kind of a given. And while dogs and robots can provide some degree of companionship, it's not really the same as having actual people and having a community to interact with and to live beside. What people need, and it's something that humans generally do need, is to feel a sense of belonging and to feel like they're part of a community. So, there's that cliche of no man is an island, but it is also true that, a person doesn't just exist on their own. There's people that they're connected to, there's people that they interact with, family, friends, partners, children, all that kind of stuff, and also the people that you live with, the people that you work with. It's very hard to live your life without interacting with any other human beings in any capacity. Let's face it, doesn't matter how far off grid you go, it's very difficult. What are you doing up there, Hancock? It's very difficult to avoid people because there's billions of them, and even in the Fallout universe, well, there's obviously a lot less people because lots of people died. There's still people, and you're still going to have to interact with them in some fashion. So some people never leave the community that they were born into. They stay in the same town, they don't ever move away. Other people travel far and wide to find their place in the world. So even in this post-nuclear wasteland, most people agree that being in a community of some kind is better than flying solo. So a lot of the kind of pre-war cities, the pre-war towns are crumbling and wasting away due to lack of maintenance. So, even the houses here, these are all kind of sort of prefab cookie cutter houses. But they're falling apart. That roof isn't going to do anything against the rain. You've got more windows than you should have. There's, leaves, which apparently you can't do anything about. That's something that always bugged me. Without mods, you can't actually clear up all this crap, which bothers me somewhat. Also, oh, that must be some aluminium. See, and there's cigars under there and things. So it's, a lot of the pre-war buildings are just not really fit for purpose anymore without extensive work. So people have found their own way and set up settlements, because these unsafe crumbling buildings and picked over ruins in the city might not be the best choice. People are still going to need shelter and somewhere to come home to. So settlements begin springing up all over the wasteland, sometimes based around existing structures like here at Sanctuary Hills, sometimes kind of building things from scratch like you see in Megaton and I think Junktown. On the other side of the country is also a bit like that. And like what happened in the real world, where towns and cities basically were built up around needs and around valuable resources. So, for example, Vegas started out as a kind of trading post in the desert and has built up into quite the fabulous city. And Boston here was one of the main landing points. So, if we look over here, kind of, so Salem and Boston was one of the main stopping points. So ships that were coming over from Europe, from Britain, from Ireland, from, France and various other places, that when they're heading east to North America, Boston is a very common kind of landing point where a lot of the, kind of British colonies started, all that kind of stuff. So, it made sense that that was a place where a lot of people would maybe settle at first, and then as time went on, people went in further afield and started kind of setting up new settlements further into the country, and it kind of grew from there. And even, if you go right back to ancient Egypt, that most of the towns and cities grew up around the Nile because they were in the middle of a desert, so staying near the water source, and then they invented irrigation so they could grow crops and things, and that all came from the Nile giving them life, essentially, that they wouldn't have had otherwise, because they needed the water, and they needed the water to grow food. So it kind of makes sense, and you do, if you really look into the geography of where towns are, where cities are, that they are often located in strategic places for either resources or for defence. Fun one where I used to work in Dumbarton, which is actually a very old location. There's a castle that actually managed to repel the Vikings in like 800 and something, so long time ago, and it's right on the River Leven, which is near the Clyde, and it's a kind of access from the sea into that part of Scotland and the west coast. So it's something, that's how society has kind of developed. It's all based around access to specific resources and things like that. And the same thing occurs in Fallout. I mean, Sanctuary up here, you settle there because that's where you lived before the war, potentially, so you would maybe want to stay there because it was familiar. But, then you've got Sunshine Tidings, which is a lot of good farming space. You've got Hangman's Alley, which is small, but it's close to Diamond City and various other things. So, it's quite a good strategic location. Somerville Place is a bit close to the Glowing Sea, right enough, but the settlements and things in the Fallout games do follow a similar pattern in some ways. Novak in New Vegas, they found a motel, set it up, and thought, this is a good place because there's existing accommodations that weren't too badly damaged, and it could be secured, and they could put a sniper's nest up in the dinosaur. So, all good. And the settlements in Fallout do vary in size. So if you look at Girdershade in the capital Wasteland in Fallout 3, has 2 residents, Sarah Petrovita and Ronald Laren. So there's 2 people that live there, and that's it. But if you look at roughly how many people are in Rivet City, if you include the generic Rivet City security and things, you're looking at least about kind of 50 people living in Rivet City. So all these kind of places have grown organically and have kind of developed all the modern conveniences. So, security, shops, bars, hotels, all that kind of stuff. They even have, clinics. Rivet City's got a church and a science lab built into it. And Diamond City has its own radio station, there's a hairdresser, there's a newspaper office, and a fancy restaurant, which is obviously not good, too good for the likes of you, according to some people, because they have this kind of class system with the upper stands and the people on the ground and all that kind of stuff. So, it's interesting that as much as things have changed and fallen apart in the world, that people are still kind of falling back into the way things were, before the entire world kind of went to hell. Some of us are also practicing some interesting techniques. Who are you? I don't even know who you are. Like, I know that's Hancock, but I don't know who this person is. Random settler. I don't know. They haven't managed to fix this yet, with people just standing on the roof. Anyway, it's interesting to see that, these things like class systems and all that kind of thing has kind of reformed again, even after the apocalypse has already happened. It's baffling. But you do also have sort of tribes and factions, so you can go one step further and you can join a tribe or a faction. And these terms are sometimes used kind of interchangeably, but there is a slight kind of difference in definition. So tribes tend to be smaller groups of people in a more kind of close-knit small society. Typically they'll have their own customs and culture, even their own traditions and sort of rituals and beliefs that they kind of hold sacred to themselves, but don't tend to share with outsiders. Some tribes are obviously closed off and they don't really want to welcome outsiders, while there are others that might be willing to, invite you into their gang, so to speak. So, you do meet quite a few, certainly over on the west coast in the Mojave area and in Zion Canyon. You've obviously, if you've played that DLC, Honest Hearts, you've got the Dead Horses, the Sorrows, the White Legs, sort of 3 different tribes. They kind of almost have their own language to a degree, and they have very specific kind of taboo about the, going into places like the caves, like the buildings. They have rituals, they have traditions, they have beliefs. They've kind of taken on board some of the teaching from the New Canaanites, from Daniel, and conflated it with their own previous beliefs about the Father in the cave, and kind of conflated them all together. So it's really, really interesting. And these people have, they've kind of gone their own way instead of kind of returning to what society was before the bomb. So really quite an interesting one. And even, you've got the 3 families of the Strip, your Chairman, your Albertas, and the White Glove Society. They were all tribals. They were 3 tribes that kind of lived around Vegas until Mr. House civilized them. It's less of the kind of tribal situation happens more on the East Coast, and I think in Fallout 3 around Washington DC, the reason for that is just because the population is so sparse, and all the wee kind of towns and communities that have been set up are quite isolated from each other, because travelling through the capital Wasteland is so dangerous with all the super mutants and death claws and other random dangers and general chaos that happens. So it kind of makes sense that there's less of that, because there's just not enough people living in proximity to each other to allow these kind of things to develop. But then you've got your factions, which are larger societies of people that tend to be based on a shared belief or a shared purpose. So they tend to control more territory and have a more kind of complex hierarchy and social structure, political structure, potentially. So the NCR, which also kind of counts as a budding nation, but we'll get back to that in a little while. Caesar's Legion and the Brotherhood of Steel, who have featured in all the games so far, they're one of the biggest factions that show up, and they can be found all over the place, really, as remnants. They were originally remnants of the US Army. So, it's quite an interesting one. And then, as I mentioned about the NCR are a faction, but they are also a nation, and what makes them a nation is that they have a defined territory with several cities or towns that are encompassed in their territory. We're talking about the NCR. The NCR have a capital city, which is Shady Sands. They have a significant amount of territory that has expanded over the years from the, humble beginnings in Fallout 1. and they control several towns. They have a political system, they do have a democracy, they have a government, they have their own currency, they've got an army. So, they have an education system, they have all sorts of things like libraries and things instituted by the time and of their unfortunate downfall, which, as of 2296, the NCR are basically gone at this point, after Shady Sands was nuked and everything that happened, that we're hopefully going to learn a bit more about exactly what went down during the season 2 of the TV show. We'll have to see. But I think it's quite interesting that the NCR seemed to be doing quite well, and then they weren't. But they did put an awful lot of resources into trying to control Hoover Dam, so that potentially contributed to their downfall to some degree as well. It's hard to say, but they would be considered a budding nation based on, that they've got all these things and they have a system in place. It's something that has grown organically out of this small town that was a bunch of people from Vault 15 that kind of started it all off. And then, of course, you can't forget about the Republic of Dave either, which is also a democracy, kind of. But it's basically just a family that's just decided that they're just going to be their own country and to hell with everybody else, which I think is quite interesting. It's quite funny. The Minutemen were obviously hanging around here. Preston's somewhere. There it is. The Minutemen, it's more what I would call that would be like an alliance of city-states that kind of trade and cooperate with each other. So, it's my absolutely chaotic supply lines. So that's what the Minutemen are really in this. There's like little kind of tiny city-states. Is there only one person at 10 Pines Bluff? Anyway, tiny little city-states that have grown up, and then they kind of trade and they work together, but they're still their own little independent thing. And then, you've got your autocratic city-state of the Free Economic Zone of New Vegas. Obviously, Mr. House being in charge of that, and the city of Las Vegas, or what's left of it. So, people do tend to kind of group together and work together to kind of build a society, whether it's 2 people or 50 people, or, some that aren't actually people at all, like Mr. Valentine here, and obviously the good doggo. It's an interesting one, and people, a lot of people that are very introverted are like, oh no, I would love to just not interact with people, but it doesn't really matter what you do in life. It's very difficult to get through life without interacting with humans at all, and even introverted people do need that to some degree. It's also safer, the sort of safety in numbers. It's a cliche, but it's also very accurate, because it's a lot easier to defend yourself against danger when you're not the only one there in a kind of shoot out last stand kind of thing, when you've got people backing you up. And also being able to share, common interests with people that also share those interests of yours, being able to talk about things that you like with other people who like that thing. It's also a good thing as well, because if I said it wasn't, that would be kind of hypocritical, given that I'm spending time basically talking to the internet about my love of Fallout and all the lore about Fallout. That's why we're here. And that's something that is really good. It's good to have a community building up. It's good to be able to share, instead of me boring people to death with talking about stuff that they're not interested in, finding people that you can share with because you have common interests. I mean, another one that I've really found massively helpful, I've mentioned this, that I'm kind of an author in progress. I'm working on a fantasy series of books, and I've joined an online writing community on Discord, and it's just full of absolutely awesome, supportive human beings, and we can talk and share ideas and get feedback from each other, and sympathise with each other when things aren't going well, all that kind of stuff. It's just fantastic. So the advice I've got for you is to, go out and find your tribe, because the people that you're compatible with are out there somewhere. It's definitely a good thing to not be completely isolated, for safety, for, you know, sanity, really. You know, you want to have people to talk to keep yourself sane. There's Codsworth with his bowler hat on. Yeah. Everybody's decided to hang out in my house, that's fine. But yeah, so that's my advice, is go find your tribe. You'll be surprised what you can find, and that there are going to be like-minded people out there that do have, you know, the same interests as you, and that you can build a connection with. And I think that's something that's really important from a psychological standpoint. It is something that is important. It's something that humans do need. So hopefully that was interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have a favourite in terms of companions in the Fallout games? It's something that I'll be talking about more specifically soon, is the companions themselves, what they're like and how they function, I think, because it's really quite an interesting system. And I like most of the companions. Hancock's a favourite of mine. I do love Nick Valentine as well. He's a good egg. Craig Boone, as grumpy as he is, he's you know, I think he's a very interesting character. Fox from Fallout 3, he's kind of a person. I don't know, don't tell strong. I mean, it kind of is, you know. I think that's really, really interesting. Do you have a favourite settlement? Do you have a favourite city? You know, some of the major cities, I think, in the Fallout games are really, really interesting. And I do love how they do feel quite unique to each other. You know, Megaton is iconic. Diamond City, I like how they have built it up around the kind of baseball stadium. It's a very interesting choice. And I do like Novak as well from New Vegas. That's a favourite. Dinky the dinosaur and everything. I just think it's a really cool design. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.